All right, so more on injury news here. Once again, a lot of did not practices from Thursday. Jalen Waddle dealing with a concussion from the brutal hit he took against New England. Joe Burrow did not practice. He's dealing with that calf injury. We'll revisit that in a second. Odell Beckham and Justice Hill did not practice for the Ravens. Sounds like Bryce Young will not play. He could miss 1 to 2 weeks as he deals with the ankle injury. It'll be the Andy Dalton show for the Panthers. DK Metcalf, on the other hand, Puka Nacua and Derrick Henry. Feels like more veteran rest. Yes, they are dealing with things, but they're just not pushing them in practice. They should be okay. Doesn't look like Anthony Richardson is going to play as he deals with that concussion. It'll be Gardner Minshew for the Colts, and David Montgomery dealing with the quad contusion as we've updated throughout the week. Let's start with Joe Burrow here, Barry. He did not practice on Thursday, and we actually got to hear from Joe Burrow after practice on the injury and if he'll be able to play on the longer rest week. Let's hear from Joe Burrow.
Just feeling better, not a sore. Time heals, so we'll see.
Feel like you'll be able to play Sunday?
We'll see.
What were you able to do today at practice?
I was out there. We'll see. I'm preparing like I'm going to go out and play a Monday Night Football game. Whether that happens, I don't know, but I'm going to be prepared to.
Barry, not the most optimistic breakdown from Joe Burrow. This truly feels like a game time wait and see what he can do.
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah, we'll see.
On to Cincinnati.
On to Cincinnati. Look, I mean, the key here is that the fact that he didn't practice on Thursday is merely a Wednesday practice. They play the Monday night game. So that's their schedule is a day later. So again, if he doesn't practice on Saturday, then you're like, sort of nervous. Let's see if he does any work today as well. What I would say though is, again, because it's not only the Monday night game, but it's the second Monday night game. Once again, we have 2 games on Monday night. That always drives me crazy. I want 1 game on Monday night, 1 game on Sunday night, 1 game on Monday night, 1 game on Thursday night. Stop with the multiple games in prime time. That's me. This is my own personal feeling. That said, it's the second primetime game on Monday night, which means that if you have Burrow, you either need to try to grab Matthew Stafford, who's still out there in a number of leagues. That's who Cincinnati plays on Monday night. They play the Bengals. They play the Rams. Or if Stafford is gone in your league, you either need to, A, get comfortable with Jake Browning as your starter, or look elsewhere on the waiver wire and just chance it. Again, wait to see. I mean, one thing you could do is maybe we get more news. Think about this. The Sunday night game is Steelers-Raiders. I actually think both Garoppolo and I think that's going to be a sneaky high-scoring game, and I actually kind of like Kenny Pickett. I know he's been bad for 2 weeks, but he's probably out there in a lot of leagues. So you could grab Pickett as a pivot and hope you get news by Sunday night, or see how your game is going. And maybe if your game's going and you're up by a decent amount, you could say, like, you know what, I'll risk it with Jake Browning or whatever. And if you're like, oh, no, it's close, I'm going to need a good quarterback game, then maybe you go grab Kenny Pickett. But either way, just be aware, watch the practice reports today. This is nerve-wracking until we know whether or not Joe Burrow is going to go. It's the last game of the week. The one thing I will say is, regardless of whether Joe Burrow is in or out, if I have Jamar Chase, if I have T. Higgins, if I have Joe Mixon, I'm starting them regardless of who's under center. They're too good to bench.
And Jay, as we sat down to record the show, the Bengals did bring Reed Sinnett onto their practice squad. I know he was with them during the summer, and obviously Sinnett's not somebody that you're looking at, going crazy over, but the fact is they need a backup for Jake Browning if Joe Burrow can't play. So they're preparing for all scenarios. This truly seems up in the air.
Yeah, and so the line for this game, Connor, opened at Bengals -6.5 when it seemed like Burrow would play. Then it went all the way down to 1.5, and now it's back at 3. And this 3 is a fake line. Like, it's not going to finish at 3 because if Burrow doesn't play, it'll go closer to pick. If he does play, it'll be more like 6. So I think this is a true 50-50, and I'm in a Scotty Fishbowl league where Superflex, I've got 3 quarterbacks, Brock Purdy, Matthew Stafford, Joe Burrow. Normally, I would have started Stafford and Burrow. Because of the Burrow uncertainty, I just started Purdy, and then I'll see Stafford, Burrow, who's ready to go. I might just start Stafford anyway because of the uncertainty. But yeah, to Matthew's point, I think you kind of need to pick up Jake Browning.
Wild.
If you've got Burrow.
Yeah, wild. If you don't have a quarterback that can play this weekend to be safe. On some
Have
other
a plan.
Yeah, have a plan, exactly. On some more positive injury news here, Kenneth Gainwell did return to Eagles practice. He was dealing with the rib injury. It was just a limited session for Gainwell, but we also heard from Nick Sirianni on potentially just sticking with DeAndre Swift if the hot hand is rolling that way. Let's hear from Sirianni.
we're going to ride the hot hand. Do I think it's sustainable? I mean, I think he's, his body's ready to go. And, I don't ever want to put an expectation on anybody of, if he's got the hot hand on Monday night, we'll keep rolling with him. So we feel really good about the work he puts in to make sure that his body's right. And, it's hard not to run a ball like that and give it to him 35 times. It's hard not to do that.
Nick Sirianni on the state of the Eagles' backfield right now. Jay, how do you look at this group if Gainwell comes back, Swift coming off of a monster week? It's a team that we thought coming into the year they were going to split the carries anyway. Injuries have kind of dictated something else, but how do you break this situation down?
So the way I'd break it down is I think DeAndre Swift, and we spoke about this earlier, but I think DeAndre Swift is the highest variance player in fantasy the rest of the season because there is a chance that, particularly with Gainwell injured and maybe not 100%, that if he gets another week to be a workhorse back, maybe they just stick with him because he is super talented. He's never played in a context that is this good and this favorable, and he could be a top 5 running back in fantasy this year. He could also in 2 weeks just be the second or third stringer. So I would say the approach with DeAndre Swift in particular is that if you're in a league where you've started 0-2 and you need to make a home run swing, try and trade for DeAndre Swift, someone who's not comfortable with the situation in Philadelphia because he has just tremendous upside, Connor.
Barry, I know that Gainwell comes in right now as RB30 for you as they get ready to play the Bucs. What would you do with this backfield if you were rostering these guys? Is there anybody that you potentially might just sit this week?
No. I mean, again, I had Gainwell at running back 30, so I don't have him listed as a starter except in a deeper league. I would start DeAndre Swift if I had him. You heard Sirianni. I like the fact that Sirianni's sitting there going like, yeah, I'd have no problem running him 35 times. That's the comments of a kind of guy that has clearly never had DeAndre Swift on his fantasy roster because that's never happening. We love DeAndre Swift. Certainly, if I'm playing an Eagles running back this weekend, it is DeAndre Swift. He'll have the opportunity to continue the hot hand that he started last week against the Vikings. All that said, it's going to be a committee. My expectation is that Jalen Hurts starts to get going as well. Like he's been a little bit slow to get going. And what I would do with this backfield to answer your initial question is that whoever I had, I would stay put because I do think Kenneth Gainwell will have value this year. And clearly Swift is going to have value this year. And what we talked about after that Vikings game is that the fact is coming into the year, we thought it might be a 4-headed monster adding in Rashad Penny and Boston Scott. And I think what we can feel confident about saying is that unless there's an injury to either one of these guys, that Boston Scott and Rashad Penny aren't going to be a thing. Kenneth Gainwell was out in week 2, and still Boston Scott and Rashad Penny couldn't get a sniff. So a backfield that's really only 2 people, Swift and Gainwell, that we can work with. We can work with that because that offense is that explosive. That offensive line is that good. They're not that run heavy. I mean, they will be run heavy, but you know what I mean? Like we can work with that. So I think Swift is a RB2 with upside. I think Gainwell is a flex play, a low-end flex play at least this week until we see how it shakes out a little bit. But, there's going to be value for both those guys in the backfield this year.
Jay, another backfield getting healthy. Aaron Jones returned to practice for Green Bay on Thursday. He was limited right now, and he's been dealing with this hamstring injury that I think at first kind of came out of nowhere. We didn't know how long he'd be out. He ends up missing some time. Obviously, a team that has no problem going back to A.J. Dillon, but the kind of juice that Jones brings to this backfield and how important he is to fantasy rosters right now, him playing in any capacity would be huge.
Yeah, and if Aaron Jones is good to go, you've just got to fire him up and start him in every league. The Packers are 1.5-point favorites over the Saints. He's Aaron Jones. He just has to play. If for some reason he doesn't play, A.J. Dillon, who I think would have disappointed people last week given that he was only 15 for 55, only had the 1 reception, didn't get in the end zone. The Packers only ran 47 plays in that game because they couldn't get Bijan and Tyler Algier off the field, and so they just never had any time of possession. So if Jones can't play, then A.J. Dillon is, I would think, a top 20 player this week, Matthew.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. Barry, one more.
We move on.
Okay. You kind of pulled the Joe Burrow on there, which I actually completely respect in that spot.
We'll see if Jay is right. We'll see if Jay's right. We'll see. Jay's right.
Our last one here, Panthers writer Darren Gant said Bryce Young is not expected to play in Week 3 against the Seahawks. We've even seen some reports out there that this ankle injury could be a 1 to 2 week injury. Barry, getting away from Bryce Young because he's not fantasy relevant right now, and his replacement, Andy Dalton, won't be fantasy relevant either. But Andy Dalton coming into this team playing under center, how does that impact maybe Adam Thielen, Hayden Hurst? It doesn't feel like the offense gets worse with Andy Dalton taking over at this moment.
I think it gets better fantasy-wise. Again, Bryce Young's the future, and you understand I'm in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, where Bryce Young drinks for free anytime he wants to, right? So, Bryce Young is God here, and rightfully so. But I will say that in the short term, I do think this offense will be better under Andy Dalton, who is and I say this with respect, a professional quarterback who can make plays and do the reads and get the ball out. And I think is likely going to be a little bit more aggressive than Bryce Young is at the moment. I think it's good news for Adam Thielen. I think it's good news for Hayden Hurst. And I do think it's good news for Jonathan Mingo, who I think is somebody players should go out and grab and stash. Very quietly last week, Jonathan Mingo had a 95% route participation. Now, again, it didn't totally show up in the fantasy box score, but the fact of the matter is that if he's out there on that many routes, he's the future in Carolina, not Adam Thielen. Candidly, not even Hayden Hurst. We'll see about DJ Shark at some point. But, I don't know. I think Jonathan Mingo is one of those guys that, I would grab and stash before you have to go out and compete for him. So I do think Dalton, they'll be a little bit more open pass-wise with Dalton under center. It's not a matchup that scares you against the Seahawks either. So I think this helps both those guys. And I think, Thielen becomes, Hayden Hurst becomes a viable tight end too under Hurst. Under Dalton. And, Adam Thielen is a low-end wide receiver 3 who, put up good numbers last week.
Jay, and I think to further enhance that point, the injury to Bryce Young feels like hasn't moved this line at all, right?
No. I mean, it's been bouncing around between 4.5 and 5.5, but that doesn't really mean anything. So few games actually finish with a 5-point margin. I'm with Matthew. I think this makes their offense better, if anything. Bryce Young has been the worst quarterback in the NFL by PFF grades so far. And look, he's played 2 games. He's young. He's going to be good eventually, but right now he's not really helping this offense succeed in the passing game. And I agree that Jonathan Mingo, who was playing basically every snap, and had 8 targets against the Saints. I think he is a guy, his receiving prop on DraftKings is 36.5. For a guy who plays almost every snap and got a lot of targets and is a part of this offense, I think that's a little bit too low. So for deeper leagues, I think Mingo is viable.
Hey, it's Matthew Berry from NBCSports.com and Rotoworld.com, and I want to thank you so much for watching whatever it is you just watched, or if nothing else, being too lazy to click out of the autoplay after this video started, after whatever it is you actually wanted to watch finished. But now that you're here, I'd like to take a moment here to ask you respectfully now, okay? I'm asking you respectfully to subscribe to the NFL on NBC YouTube channel. You'll get the latest Roto-World fantasy news headlines, all sorts of great shows, including my own Fantasy Football Happy Hour. So go subscribe now. Again, I'm asking respectfully.